The silence should have been our first warning. When 5 college graduates pull up to their dream vacation rental, the last thing they expect is absolute quiet. No birds, no insects, not even wind rustling through the towering pines that surrounded the property like sentinels. Emma Martinez killed the engine of her Honda Pilot and stared through the windshield at the rustic log cabin that would be their home for the next week. At 22, she'd planned dozens of group trips, but this felt different. Special somehow. "Holy shit," Tyler Chen whispered from the passenger seat, his economics degree apparently not preparing him for the raw beauty of Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. "Emma, how did you find this place?" Emma grinned, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Pure luck. Some random rental site I'd never heard of, rusticretreat.net or something. Posted 3 days ago for like 60% below market rate." She unbuckled her seatbelt and stretched. The owner said they just needed to fill the dates quickly. Madison Wells bounced in the back seat, her nursing program stress finally melting away. At 21, she'd barely slept in the past month thanks to final exams, but her blue eyes sparkled with the kind of energy that made everyone around her feel more alive. "It's like something from a horror movie," she laughed, then immediately covered her mouth. "I mean, in the best way possible." Cole Thompson, 22 and fresh from his history degree, was already studying the tree line with the analytical gaze that had made him invaluable during group projects. The architecture looks authentic 1970s, probably built when this area was first developed for tourism. He paused, frowning slightly. Though it's weird how isolated it is. Most Deep Creek properties are clustered near the main lake access. Zoe Kim, the youngest at 20, was practically vibrating with excitement. Her photography major had trained her eye to notice details others missed, and she was already framing shots through her phone camera. "The lighting is incredible. That golden hour glow against the dark wood. This is going to be Instagram gold." They climbed out of the car, and the silence hit them like a physical wall. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching dusk. The cabin sat in a small clearing, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forest for nearly 2 miles after leaving the main highway. Towering oaks and maples created a natural canopy so thick that even in late afternoon, shadows pooled in every direction. "No cell service," Tyler announced, holding his phone toward the sky like an offering. "Not even one bar." "Perfect," Emma said, though something in her stomach twisted. "That's exactly what we need. Complete disconnection from the real world." The cabin itself was undeniably charming. 2 stories of honey-colored logs, with a wraparound porch and large windows that reflected the surrounding forest. A stone chimney promised cozy fires, and the promise of a private dock had been a major selling point. It looked exactly like the photos from the rental listing, almost too perfectly rustic. Madison grabbed her duffel bag and bounded toward the front door. "Come on, let's see if it's as amazing inside." The key was exactly where the rental instructions had indicated, under a ceramic frog beside the door. Emma turned the lock and pushed the door open, and they stepped into what felt like a magazine spread for cozy cabin living. Exposed beams crossed the vaulted ceiling, and a massive stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room. Comfortable furniture in warm earth tones was arranged to take advantage of the view through picture windows. The kitchen was small but well appointed, and a staircase led to what they assumed were the bedrooms. "This is unreal," Zoe breathed, already snapping photos. "It's like we stepped into a different decade." That's when Tyler noticed the photographs. They were scattered across the mantel, the coffee table, even the kitchen counter. Dozens of family photos in mismatched frames. A man and woman in their 40s with 2 young children who looked to be maybe 8 and 10 years old. The photos spanned several years, showing the family camping, hiking, and enjoying what appeared to be this very cabin. "The Brennans," Cole read from the back of one photo. "Looks like the previous owners." Emma picked up a particularly striking shot. The family standing on the dock they'd been promised, arms around each other as sunset painted the lake golden behind them. The father was tall and bearded. The mother had kind eyes and graying brown hair. The 2 boys were gap-toothed and sunburned, clearly living their best summer lives. "They look happy," Madison said softly. I hope they're okay with us using their family cabin. Probably renting it out while they're traveling, Emma reasoned, though she made a mental note to ask the rental company about it later, when she had cell service. Let's get unpacked and settled. I'm starving. They divided up the bedrooms, Emma and Zoe sharing the master, Tyler taking the single room, and Madison and Cole claiming the room with twin beds and the best view of the lake. By the time they'd unloaded the car and sorted their belongings, true darkness had fallen. The change was dramatic. During the day, the forest had seemed welcoming, almost magical. Now, beyond the circles of light cast by the cabin's windows, it was an impenetrable wall of black. The silence had deepened too, becoming something that seemed to press against the glass like a living thing. Wine? Emma asked, holding up a bottle of red they'd brought for the first night. I think we need to properly christen this place. They built a fire, Tyler proving surprisingly adept with the kindling, and settled into the comfortable chairs with their drinks. The wine loosened their tongues, and soon they were laughing about professors, comparing post-graduation plans, and reveling in the intoxicating freedom of being adults with an entire week ahead of them and no responsibilities. To surviving college, Tyler raised his glass. To surviving this week without killing each other, Cole added with a grin. To the Brennans, for having impeccable taste in vacation properties, Emma finished. They drank, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Madison was the first to notice something off. She'd volunteered to clean up their impromptu cheese and crackers dinner, and as she carried plates to the kitchen, she paused. Hey, she called to the others. Did anyone move the leftover brie? What do you mean? Emma asked, still curled up by the fire. I left it on the counter, still in the wrapper. It's gone. Tyler laughed. Cole probably stress ate it. You know how he gets. I haven't been in the kitchen since we got here, Cole protested. Madison opened the refrigerator and there it was. The brie, neatly placed on the middle shelf, still wrapped but noticeably smaller than when she'd left it. Well, someone's sleepwalking already, she said with forced lightness, but Emma caught the uncertainty in her voice. Probably just me being absent-minded, Emma said quickly. You know how I get when I'm tired. But Emma hadn't touched the cheese, and she could see in Madison's eyes that she knew it. They stayed up until nearly midnight, feeding the fire and sharing stories, but the easy atmosphere from earlier had shifted slightly. Little things kept nagging at them. A creaking floorboard upstairs when everyone was accounted for downstairs. A brief moment when the lights flickered for no apparent reason. The persistent feeling that something was watching them through the dark windows. When they finally went to bed, Emma lay awake longer than she wanted to admit, staring at the ceiling and listening to the absolute silence of the forest. Zoe's breathing beside her was steady and peaceful, but Emma found herself straining to hear something else. Footsteps, voices, anything that would explain the growing unease in her chest. She must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and Zoe was already up, making coffee in the kitchen below. Emma checked her phone, 9:47 a.m., and still no service. Downstairs, she found the others already gathering for breakfast, and the previous night's anxiety seemed foolish in the bright morning light. Cole was scrambling eggs while Tyler attempted to figure out the cabin's ancient coffee maker, and Madison was setting the table with mismatched plates that somehow made everything feel more charming. Sleep well? Zoe asked, handing Emma a steaming mug. Like a rock, Emma lied. This place is incredible, Madison gushed. I woke up and opened the curtains, and there was a deer just standing at the edge of the clearing watching the cabin. It was like something from a nature documentary. They spent the morning exploring the property. The dock was exactly as advertised, sturdy and private with a small rowboat tied alongside. The lake stretched away in both directions, its surface like glass in the still morning air. They could see other cabins in the far distance, but they were alone in their little bay. Cole, true to his historian nature, had already started researching the area's background. Deep Creek Lake is artificial, he explained as they sat on the dock, feet dangling in the cool water. Built in the 1920s when they dammed Deep Creek. The whole valley was flooded. There are actually old roads and foundations still down there. Creepy, Zoe said, but she was grinning as she said it. Gets creepier, Cole continued. The Native Americans, the Seneca tribe, considered this whole area sacred. They had stories about spirits in the water, things that didn't like to be disturbed. Cole, Emma warned, but she was smiling too. I'm just saying there's a reason most of the early settlements here failed. People kept leaving. Tyler splashed him. You're going to give Madison nightmares. I don't get nightmares, Madison protested. I give other people nightmares. They spent the afternoon swimming, grilling hamburgers on the cabin's back deck, and playing board games they'd found in a closet. It felt like the perfect summer day, and Emma began to relax into the rhythm of vacation. Whatever had felt off the night before was just first-night jitters. But as evening approached, small things started to accumulate again. The bathroom door upstairs, which Tyler swore he'd left open, was closed when he went up to shower. A chair in the living room had been moved several feet from where they remembered it. Most unsettling, the family photos seemed to have been rearranged. Not obviously, but enough that Emma found herself studying them more closely. The Brennan photos, she said to Cole while the others were outside starting the evening fire. Do they seem different to you? Cole looked at the mantel, then back at Emma. Different how? I could swear they were more scattered yesterday. Now they're all grouped together, almost like a shrine. Cole studied the arrangement. Maybe Madison moved them? You know how she likes things organized. But when they asked Madison, she shook her head. I noticed them too, actually, but I figured you guys had arranged them that way. No one admitted to touching the photographs. That night, Madison woke to the sound of footsteps above her room. Slow, deliberate steps, back and forth across the floor of what she knew was an empty attic space. She lay in her twin bed, listening to Cole's steady breathing from across the room, and counted the steps. 7 paces in one direction. A pause. 7 paces back. She waited for nearly an hour before waking Cole. Do you hear that? She whispered. Cole rolled over, instantly alert in the way that had made him invaluable during late-night study sessions. They both listened. Silence. I don't hear anything, Cole whispered back, but just as he said it, they heard it. A single heavy footstep directly overhead, followed by what sounded like something being dragged across the floor. Cole was out of bed immediately, grabbing his phone's flashlight. Stay here. Like hell, Madison hissed, following him. They crept upstairs to the main floor, where Emma, Tyler, and Zoe's rooms were. Everyone was accounted for, breathing deeply in sleep. Cole found the narrow stairs that led to the attic, a cramped space under the eaves that the rental listing had mentioned was used for storage. The attic door was unlocked. Cole pushed it open slowly, his phone's light cutting through absolute darkness. The space was empty except for a few cardboard boxes and some old furniture covered with sheets. Dust motes danced in his light beam, and he could see footprints in the dust, recent ones. But they were alone up there. Someone was here, Madison whispered, pointing to the disturbed dust patterns. Look, you can see where they were walking. Cole knelt down, studying the prints. They were made by bare feet, and they were larger than any of theirs. Much larger. In the morning, they told the others about the footsteps. Emma's first instinct was to find a rational explanation. Maybe the cabin settled strangely, or they'd heard an animal on the roof. But Tyler had grabbed his laptop and was trying to connect to the spotty Wi-Fi signal they'd discovered. I want to look up this place, he said. Something about it feels off. It took him nearly an hour to get a stable connection, but when he did, what he found made everyone gather around the small screen. Jesus Christ, Tyler breathed. The headline from the Garrett County Republican dated 3 years ago was stark. Local family of 4 found dead in hiking accident near Deep Creek Lake. Emma's stomach dropped as she read over Tyler's shoulder. The Brennan family was discovered deceased on Sunday morning after failing to return from an evening hike near their vacation property. David Brennan, 43, Sarah Brennan, 41, and their sons Michael, 10, and Jamie, 8, were found at the bottom of a ravine approximately half a mile from their cabin. Authorities believe the family became disoriented in darkness and fell while attempting to navigate unfamiliar terrain. That's them, Zoe whispered, pointing to the accompanying photo. It was the same family from all the pictures scattered around the cabin. Tyler kept reading. The article says they were supposed to check out of their rental property that Sunday, but when they didn't and didn't respond to calls, the rental company sent someone to check on them. Cole was studying the date. 3 years ago, almost to the day. But wait, Madison said, pointing to a sidebar article. Look at this. The smaller headline read, "Mysterious lights reported at Brennan property weeks after family's death." Several residents reported seeing lights and movement at the cabin where the deceased Brennan family had been staying, weeks after their deaths and after the property had been officially vacated. Local authorities investigated but found no evidence of trespassers. "It's probably just reflections from the lake or passing cars," said Deputy Sheriff Michael Torres, "but we'll keep an eye on the property." Emma felt cold despite the warm afternoon. "Guys, I think we need to call the rental company." "With what phone?" Tyler asked grimly. "The landline's been dead since we got here." That's when Cole made his discovery. He'd been exploring the main bedroom, the one Emma and Zoe had been sharing, when he noticed that one of the floorboards felt loose under his feet. A little pressure revealed that it wasn't nailed down properly, and when he pried it up, there was a space underneath. Hidden in that space was a journal. The leather cover was worn, and the pages were filled with feminine handwriting in blue ink. The name inside the front cover read Sarah Brennan. Cole brought it downstairs with shaking hands. "June 15th, Emma read aloud from the first entry they could find. "The boys are loving the cabin, but David says he feels like someone's watching us. I thought he was being paranoid, but this morning our cooler was moved from the porch to the dock, and none of us remember doing it." Madison grabbed Emma's arm. "Keep reading." "June 18th, David found footprints in the mud by the back deck. They're too big to be any of ours, and they look fresh. When we asked the neighbors if they'd seen anyone, they said they haven't seen anyone else around for weeks." Tyler was scrolling through more search results. "There are other articles, other families." Emma's voice was getting steadier as she read, but her hands were shaking. "June 20th, Michael swears he saw someone looking in his bedroom window last night. We found the screen pushed out this morning. David wants to leave early, but we've paid for the full week, and I hate to waste the money." "June 22nd, food keeps disappearing. We'll put something in the refrigerator and find it gone hours later. This morning I found our bread and lunch meat arranged on a plate in the basement, like someone had been making sandwiches. The boys are getting scared." Zoe was taking photos of every page. "We need to document this." "June 23rd, I can't sleep. Someone was in the house last night. I heard them moving around downstairs, opening cabinets, running water. David got up to check and said everything looked normal, but in the morning we found wet footprints from the kitchen to the basement stairs. We're leaving tomorrow. Money be damned." Emma's voice cracked as she read the final entry. "June 24th, he's inside. David went to get the car packed and I heard the front door close, but David's still outside. Someone else came in. The boys are crying. We're hiding in the bedroom closet. If something happens to us, his name is Robert Henley. He lives in the woods. He's been watching families here for years. Tell our parents we love them." The journal fell silent after that. Tyler's laptop screen showed more search results. "Robert Henley," he read, "convicted of trespassing and stalking in 2003. Disappeared from a minimum security facility in 2006. Last known address." Tyler paused. "Rural area near Deep Creek Lake." Emma looked around at her friends' faces. Madison was pale. Cole looked like he was going to be sick, and Zoe had stopped taking pictures. "We need to leave," Emma said. "Right now." But when Tyler tried to start Emma's Honda Pilot, nothing happened. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, and Tyler, who'd grown up helping his dad fix cars, quickly identified the problem. "Someone pulled the spark plug wires," he said grimly. They were trapped. As if responding to their fear, the silence of the forest around them suddenly felt malevolent. What had seemed peaceful now felt like the held breath of something waiting to pounce. "The landline," Madison said desperately. "We need to check it again." But when Cole traced the phone line around the outside of the cabin, they found what they'd missed before. The line had been cut, recently judging by the clean slice through the cable. "He's still here," Zoe whispered. "He's been watching us this whole time." Emma tried to think rationally. "Okay, we can hike out. It's only 2 miles to the main road." "Through the woods," Cole said, "where he's been living for years." "We stay together," Tyler said firmly. "We pack light, we move fast, and we don't stop until we hit the highway." They rushed back into the cabin to gather essentials, but the moment they opened the front door, they knew something had changed. The family photographs were arranged differently again. Now they formed a perfect circle on the coffee table, surrounding a new addition. It was a Polaroid photograph of the 5 of them, sleeping in their beds the night before. Someone had been inside their rooms close enough to touch them while they slept. Madison started crying. Zoe grabbed Emma's hand so hard it hurt. Tyler and Cole moved to flank the group protectively, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded by thousands of acres of forest, and somewhere in that darkness was someone who knew every tree, every trail, every hiding place. That's when they heard Cole screaming. He'd been upstairs grabbing his backpack when the scream cut through the cabin like a knife. By the time the others reached the second floor, Cole was gone. His backpack was on the floor of his room and the window was wide open. Below the window, they could see drag marks in the soft earth leading toward the tree line. "Cole!" Madison screamed into the darkness. "Cole!" From somewhere in the forest, impossibly distant and yet somehow close, they heard Cole's voice calling back. But it was wrong. Too high, too panicked, and it seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. Emma grabbed Tyler's arm. "We have to help him. It's a trap," Tyler said, but he was already moving toward the window. They heard Cole scream again, this time definitely from the west, toward the lake, then again from the north, toward the road, then from directly behind the cabin. "He's playing with us," Zoe whispered. Emma made the decision for all of them. "We stick together, we find Cole, then we get out of here." Armed with flashlights and the dim glow of their dying phone batteries, they slipped out of the cabin and into the forest. The darkness was absolute beyond their small circles of light, and every step felt like walking into a mouthful of teeth. They found the first sign of Cole 50 yards from the cabin, his University of Maryland t-shirt, torn and hanging from a low branch like a flag of surrender. Blood spotted the fabric. "Cole," Tyler called. "Where are you?" This time the answer came from their left, maybe 100 yards away. "Help me, please, he's got me tied up." They crashed through the underbrush toward the voice, but when they reached the spot, they found only silence and trees. Emma swept her flashlight in a wide arc and caught something that made her heart stop. A second cabin. This one was smaller, older, and dark, but there was definitely someone living there. Laundry hanging from a makeshift clothesline, a garden area cleared in the trees, and the unmistakable smell of wood smoke and unwashed human. "That's where he's been staying," Madison whispered. Tyler approached the cabin carefully, but before he could reach the door, it swung open. Robert Henley looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd been living wild in the forest for years. His hair and beard were long and matted, his clothes were a patchwork of stolen items, and his eyes held the flat, predatory stare of something that no longer considered itself entirely human. "You shouldn't have read the journal," he said in a voice like rusted metal. Emma grabbed Madison's hand and ran. Behind them, Tyler shouted something, but Emma couldn't hear over the sound of branches whipping past her face and her own panicked breathing. She and Madison crashed through the forest with no idea where they were going, following whatever path seemed most open. They ran until their lungs burned, until Madison stumbled and went down hard, scraping her hands and knees on the rocky ground. "I can't," Madison gasped. "I can't run anymore." Emma helped her to her feet, and they found themselves in a small clearing. In the distance she could see lights, not the warm yellow of the cabin, but the harsh white of LEDs. "The ranger station," Emma breathed. "Cole mentioned seeing it on the first day." They made their way toward the lights, supporting each other and trying to move as quietly as possible. The ranger station was a small building with a radio tower, and Emma had never been so happy to see anything in her life. But when they reached the building, they found Tyler and Zoe already there, working frantically at what looked like a radio. "Thank God," Tyler said when he saw them. "I got through to the state police. They're sending someone, but it'll take at least 30 minutes to get here." "What about Cole?" Madison asked. Tyler's expression darkened. "Henley has him. I think he's alive, but what? I think Henley's been doing this for years, taking people, keeping them. The Brennans weren't his first victims." Emma sank into a chair, the full horror of their situation hitting her. "How many people?" "I don't know, but I found something else while you were gone." Tyler held up a small digital camera. This was in the ranger station. They've been getting reports for years about missing hikers, missing families, all around this area. Zoe was standing guard by the window, but now she turned toward them with fear in her eyes. "Guys, he's here." Through the window they could see a figure moving between the trees. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was walking calmly toward the ranger station, and in his arms was a person-shaped bundle that wasn't moving. "Cole," Madison whispered. Tyler grabbed the radio again. "This is an emergency. We have visual on the suspect. He has our friend. We need immediate assistance at the Deep Creek Ranger Station." The response crackled back. "Units are 15 minutes out. Stay inside and do not engage." But Henley was already at the door. Emma had never heard anything like the sound he made. Part human voice, part animal growl. "You can't hide from me," he called. "I know every inch of these woods. I've been here longer than anyone." Tyler braced himself against the door, but it was clear the old building wouldn't hold against a determined assault. "There's another way out," Zoe said, pointing to a window on the far side of the building. Emma looked back at the radio. They were so close to rescue, but if they left the ranger station, they'd be back in Henley's territory with no way to call for help. The decision was made for them when the front window exploded inward. Henley came through in a shower of glass, still carrying Cole's unconscious form. Up close, Emma could see that Cole was breathing but had a nasty head wound. 17 years, Henley said, setting Cole down carefully. 17 years I've been taking care of this place, keeping it clean. Families come and go, but they always leave messes. Tyler stepped forward protectively. "Let him go. Let all of us go." Henley laughed, and the sound raised every hair on Emma's arms. "You don't understand. This is my home. You're the trespassers." "The police are coming," Madison said. "They've come before," Henley replied. "They never find anything." That's when Emma realized the truth. "You killed the Brennans." "I protected them," Henley corrected. "From themselves. They were going to tell people about me, bring more strangers to my home. I couldn't let that happen." Emma saw Tyler's muscles tense, preparing to rush Henley, but she also saw the knife in the wild man's hand, a hunting blade that looked well used. "How many?" Emma asked, hoping to buy time. "How many families?" "Enough," Henley said, "but I'm getting tired. Maybe it's time to find a different home." That's when they heard it. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Henley's expression changed, becoming something desperate and wild. "No," he snarled. "Not this time." He lunged toward Tyler with the knife, but Cole, who everyone had thought was unconscious, threw himself sideways, knocking Henley off balance. Tyler grabbed a heavy flashlight from the ranger's desk and brought it down on Henley's wrist, and the knife went flying. Emma and Madison dove for Cole, dragging him away from the struggle, while Zoe threw herself toward the radio. "Officer down," she screamed into the microphone. "Shots fired." She had no idea if those were the right words, but she hoped they would bring help faster. Tyler and Henley were grappling on the floor, and Tyler was losing. 17 years of living wild had made Henley impossibly strong. But just as Henley's hands found Tyler's throat, the front door exploded inward. "State police, everybody down!" The next few minutes were chaos. Shouted commands, bright tactical lights, and the blessed sound of handcuffs clicking shut. When it was over, Robert Henley was in custody, Cole was being loaded into an ambulance, and Emma found herself wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember anyone giving her. The detective who took their statements was a kind-faced woman named Ramirez, and she listened to their story with the expression of someone who'd heard similar tales before. "He'll go away for life," she assured them. "We've been looking for him for years, and you've given us enough evidence to connect him to at least 6 missing persons cases." "Only 6?" Emma asked. Detective Ramirez's expression grew grim. "So far, we're still digging." Emma never went camping again. Tyler became obsessed with researching every place he traveled, reading reviews, checking crime statistics, and cross-referencing missing persons reports. His friends called it paranoid, but Tyler didn't care. Madison changed her major to criminal psychology and eventually became a victim's advocate, helping families navigate the aftermath of violent crimes. Cole recovered from his physical injuries, but the nightmares took longer to heal. He still won't go into forests alone, and he sleeps with every light in his apartment turned on. Zoe surprised everyone by becoming more fearless, not less. She started a blog called Survivors' Stories and dedicated herself to helping other people tell their experiences with violent crime. She said that facing the worst humanity had to offer had somehow made her less afraid of everything else. The cabin at Deep Creek Lake was demolished 6 months later, after investigators found the remains of 11 people buried in the surrounding forest. Robert Henley pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole. But sometimes, late at night when Emma can't sleep, she finds herself thinking about those 17 years. About all the families who thought they were just going on vacation. About how many people had looked out at that beautiful, peaceful forest and never realized that something was looking back. The silence should have been their first warning, but by the time they understood what it meant, it was almost too late. The water was too perfect. That should have been Blake Morrison's first clue that something was wrong with their dream fishing trip. As he guided their rented 24-foot Starcraft across Lake Vermilion's glass-smooth surface, the 24-year-old couldn't shake the feeling that nature was holding its breath. Behind him, his 4 best friends from the University of Wisconsin were already settling into vacation mode, but Blake kept scanning the endless expanse of northern Minnesota wilderness that stretched in every direction. "This is what I'm talking about," Sierra Chen called out, her camera already documenting every detail of their escape from civilization. At 23, she'd built a modest social media following by showcasing adventure trips, and this week in the Boundary Waters canoe area was supposed to be her masterpiece. "Look at this place, guys. Not a single power line, cell tower, or Starbucks in sight." Connor Walsh looked up from his GPS unit, his engineering mind already calculating distances and fuel consumption. At 25, he was the oldest and most cautious of the group, which made him invaluable for trips like this. "We're about 40 miles from the nearest road," he announced, "and another 20 from the closest ranger station. Blake, you sure this old motor can handle getting us back out?" Blake patted the outboard engine confidently. 1998, Yamaha 200. They don't make them like this anymore. This baby could run forever on fumes. He'd been taking boats into remote waters since he was 12, following his father's footsteps as a serious angler. "Trust me, we'll catch fish in places where people haven't dropped a line in years." Avery Rodriguez was already rigging her fishing gear with the methodical precision that had made her pre-med studies so successful. At 22, she approached everything with scientists' attention to detail. "The lake maps show some incredible structure out here," she said, studying the depth finder. "Drop-offs, underwater ridges, perfect walleye habitat." Quinn Taylor, 24 and the group's designated observer of unusual details, was standing at the bow with an expression Blake recognized, that slightly furrowed brow that meant she was processing something that didn't quite add up. "Has anyone else noticed how quiet it is?" she asked. "I mean really quiet. No boat engines, no planes overhead, no anything." "That's the point," Sierra laughed, spinning in a slow circle with her arms outstretched. "Complete disconnection from the chaos of modern life. This is going to be the most authentic outdoor experience any of us have ever had." Blake guided them deeper into the wilderness, following waterways that grew narrower and more pristine with each passing mile. The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting the water gold and casting long shadows from the towering pines that crowded every shoreline. They passed countless small islands, some just rocky outcroppings, others substantial enough to support small forests. It was Quinn who spotted their perfect campsite. There, she pointed to a small island maybe 50 yards long, with a natural clearing surrounded by mature birch and pine trees. It's got good wind protection and enough space for all our tents. Blake nosed the boat onto the narrow beach, and they began the familiar ritual of unloading gear: tents, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, coolers full of food and beer, fishing tackle, and all the other essentials for a week of wilderness living. Connor took charge of the camp setup with his usual efficiency, while Avery and Quinn gathered firewood and Sierra documented everything with her camera. "This is absolutely perfect," Blake said as he secured the boat's anchor. "Remote enough that we won't see another soul, but close enough to deep water that the fishing should be incredible." As they worked, the sun continued its descent, and the character of their surroundings began to change. What had seemed merely peaceful in daylight now felt almost oppressively quiet. The water lapped gently against their rocky beach, but there were no other sounds. No loons calling, no fish jumping, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Connor finished checking their equipment with his typical thoroughness. "GPS is showing good satellite connection, radio is picking up the emergency weather channel, and we've got enough fuel to run the motor for about 30 hours total. Food and water for 7 days, first aid kit, flares, emergency beacon." He paused, consulting his checklist. "We're good to go for a week of serious fishing." Sierra was setting up her camera equipment for what she called golden hour shots, when she made an observation that would stick with all of them. "You know what's weird? I haven't seen a single piece of trash anywhere. No beer cans floating in the water, no candy wrappers caught in bushes, nothing. It's like no one has ever been here." "Maybe we really did find virgin waters," Blake said, but something in his tone suggested he found it as unsettling as intriguing. Quinn walked the perimeter of their small island while the others built the fire, and what she found made her call the others over. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an area near the water's edge where smooth stones had been arranged in deliberate patterns. Not random arrangements that wind and waves might create, but careful geometric designs. Circles within circles, with animal bones placed at specific points. "Probably just something the wind did," Blake said, but he was frowning as he examined the arrangements. Avery knelt down to look more closely. "These bones are from different animals, fish, birds, maybe small mammals, and they're all positioned with the head ends pointing toward the water." "Native American ritual site?" Connor suggested. "Maybe," Quinn said, but her expression remained troubled. "Or maybe something else entirely." They cooked dinner over their fire as full darkness settled over the wilderness. The flames provided a warm circle of light and security, but beyond that circle, the darkness felt absolute and somehow watchful. The normal sounds of a healthy wilderness ecosystem, owls calling, small animals rustling, the occasional fish jumping, were completely absent. "Tomorrow we hit the fishing hard," Blake said, trying to recapture the excitement they'd all felt during the day. "I'm talking about catching more walleye than we can eat." "Speaking of eating," Sierra said, filming herself taking a bite of their camp-cooked hamburgers, "this is the best food I've ever tasted. Something about cooking over an open fire in the middle of absolute nowhere just makes everything better." They stayed up until nearly midnight, talking about their post-graduation plans, sharing college memories, and feeding the fire. The beer loosened their tongues and helped them ignore the oppressive silence that surrounded their small island of light and warmth. When they finally retreated to their tents, Blake found himself lying awake longer than he wanted to admit. Something about the place felt wrong, but he couldn't articulate exactly what. The silence was too complete, the isolation too absolute. In all his years of wilderness fishing, he'd never found a place that felt this removed from the normal world. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A gentle splash near the boat, as if something large had just surfaced or submerged near their anchorage. Blake unzipped his tent quietly and peered out into the darkness. The fire had died down to glowing coals, providing just enough light to make out the silhouette of their boat rocking gently at anchor. Everything looked normal, but as he watched, he could swear he saw something pale move just beneath the surface of the water, before disappearing into the depths. Probably just a large fish, he told himself. But he lay awake for another hour, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against their island and trying to convince himself that the wilderness wasn't as empty as it seemed. Connor was the first one awake, which wasn't unusual. His internal clock was incredibly precise. What was unusual was what he found when he went to check their boat. "Blake," he called, his voice carrying a note of urgent concern that brought everyone stumbling out of their tents. "We have a problem." Blake jogged to the water's edge where Connor was standing waist-deep next to their boat, his face grim in the early morning light. "Someone sabotaged the motor," Connor said flatly. "What do you mean sabotaged?" Sierra asked, already reaching for her camera before thinking better of it. Connor pointed to the engine compartment. "Fuel line disconnected, spark plug wires pulled loose, and someone dumped something into the gas tank. Smells like lake water." Blake waded out to examine the damage himself. Connor was right. This wasn't random vandalism or accident. Someone had methodically disabled their primary means of escape, doing it quietly enough that none of them had heard anything during the night. "Can you fix it?" Avery asked, her pre-med pragmatism kicking in. "Maybe," Connor said, already starting to work. "But it'll take time, and I'll need to drain and clean the fuel system completely." Quinn was scanning the water around their island, looking for any sign of how someone could have reached their boat. "There's no other boat," she said. "No canoe, no kayak, nothing. How did someone get out here?" "They swam," Blake said quietly, and the implication of that hung heavy in the morning air. While Connor worked on the engine, the others tried to salvage their fishing plans, but even that began to go wrong in ways that felt too systematic to be coincidental. Sierra was the first to notice the underwater shadows. "Blake, come look at this," she called from the deeper water on the north side of their island. "I'm getting something really weird on video." Blake swam over to where Sierra was floating with her underwater camera, pointing it down into the clear depths. Through the viewfinder, he could see what had caught her attention. Large, dark shapes moving beneath them, far too big and wrong-shaped to be fish. "What are they?" Sierra whispered. Blake dove down to get a closer look, but the shapes melted away into the deeper darkness before he could make out any details. When he surfaced, he was breathing hard and trying to process what he'd glimpsed in those few seconds underwater. "I think they were people," he said. By noon, all of them had experienced something that defied easy explanation. Quinn's fishing lines were being cut with surgical precision, not broken by fish or snagged on underwater obstacles, but sliced clean through. Avery found more bone arrangements on nearby islands, always positioned the same way, always including both animal and what looked suspiciously like human remains. Connor made temporary repairs to their engine, but when he tried to start it, the motor sputtered and died after just a few seconds. "We're stranded," he announced. "At least until I can figure out what else they did to it." "They?" Sierra asked. "Whoever's been watching us," Connor said grimly, "because someone definitely has been." That afternoon, Quinn made the discovery that changed everything. She'd been exploring a slightly larger island about a quarter-mile from their camp when she found the remnants of previous campsites hidden in the dense vegetation. Not old sites, recent ones. Tents, sleeping bags, coolers, and camping gear from what appeared to be multiple groups scattered throughout the forest floor. But it was what she found mixed in with the camping gear that made her scream. Human bones. Fresh ones, with bits of dried flesh still clinging to them, arranged in the same geometric patterns they'd seen on their own island, but on a much larger scale. Blake and the others reached her within minutes, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound of her voice. What they found made Sierra immediately stop filming and Avery start inventorying their first aid supplies. "How many people?" Blake asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he surveyed the grisly scene. Quinn was counting tent remains and sleeping bags. "At least 6 different groups," she said. "Look, there's gear from different years, different brands. This has been happening for a while." Connor found something that made his engineering training recoil. These bones weren't just scattered by animals, he said. Look at the cut marks, the way they're arranged. Someone did this deliberately. Avery found a digital camera among the remains, its memory card somehow still functional despite months of exposure to weather. The photos it contained would haunt all of them forever. Images of happy families and groups of friends enjoying what should have been perfect wilderness vacations, followed by increasingly disturbing shots of pale figures moving in the background, watching from the tree line. The final photos on the camera showed the truth. Humanoid figures, but wrong in every detail. Pale skin that looked almost translucent, hair that hung in matted ropes, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Most disturbing were their proportions. Too tall, too thin, with elongated limbs that moved in ways human joints shouldn't allow. They're people, Sierra whispered, studying the images. But they're wrong. Feral, Avery said with clinical precision. Probably been isolated out here for generations. Inbreeding, malnutrition, complete disconnection from civilization. They've become something else. Blake was studying the photos of the actual attacks. They're coordinated. Look at these shots, they work together like a pack. That's when they heard the first response to their voices. From across the water, carried on the still afternoon air, came an answering call that was almost human, but not quite. It started low and rose in pitch with harmonics that made their skin crawl. Then another voice joined it, and another, until the entire wilderness around them echoed with the alien communication of things that had once been people. We need to get off this lake, Connor said, frantically working on the engine. Right now. But as he pulled the starter cord, all that emerged was a weak coughing sound. They were still trapped. Night fell like a curtain being drawn, and with it came the first real attack. Blake was maintaining their fire when Quinn, who'd been keeping watch at the water's edge, gave a sharp whistle, their agreed-upon danger signal. They're here, she whispered. At first, Blake couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. Then his eyes adjusted and he realized the water around their island was full of barely visible shapes, pale heads breaking the surface just long enough to breathe before submerging again, dozens of them circling like sharks. How long have they been there? Sierra asked, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Quinn replied. They don't make any sound when they swim. Connor grabbed their spotlight and swept it across the water. The beam caught several of the swimmers fully illuminated, and the sight was worse than the photos had suggested. These had once been human beings, but isolation and generations of survival in this remote wilderness had changed them into something else. Their skin was pale to the point of being nearly transparent, stretched tight over gaunt frames. Their hair was long and matted with lake vegetation. Most disturbing were their eyes, large, dark, and completely focused on the 5 people huddled around their campfire. They're studying us, Avery realized, learning our patterns, our weaknesses. The swimmers maintained their silent circle for nearly an hour before melting away into the darkness as suddenly as they'd appeared. But none of Blake's group slept that night. In the morning, they found evidence of nocturnal visitors all around their campsite, wet handprints on their tent walls, missing food from their supposedly secure coolers, and most disturbing of all, their spare fuel can had been emptied and refilled with lake water. Connor's repair work on the engine was systematically undone. Every wire he'd reconnected was pulled loose again. Every component he'd cleaned was recontaminated. They know exactly what they're doing, he said with grudging respect for his opponents. This isn't random vandalism. They understand our technology well enough to disable it specifically. Because they've done this before, Blake said, thinking about all the camping gear they'd found on the other island. Many times. That's when Quinn disappeared. She'd been fishing from the eastern shore of their island, visible to the others but far enough away to have some privacy. Blake was helping Connor with the engine when Sierra's scream brought them running. Quinn's fishing rod was floating 20 yards offshore, broken in half. Her tackle box sat open on the rocks, its contents scattered as if she'd dropped it suddenly. There was blood on the stones where she'd been sitting, and drag marks leading from the shore into the dense vegetation. "Quinn!" Blake shouted into the forest. "Quinn, where are you?" The response came from the wrong direction entirely. Quinn's voice, weak and terrified, calling from somewhere across the water on the mainland. They found her 30 minutes later, using their small emergency raft to reach the opposite shore. She was sitting in shallow water, staring blankly ahead, with deep scratches across her back and arms. When Blake tried to help her stand, she flinched away from his touch. "The water," she whispered. "They came from under the water, hands grabbing my legs, pulling me down. I thought I was going to drown." "Who?" Sierra asked gently. "Who grabbed you?" Quinn's eyes focused on her friends for the first time. "The swimmers, but they weren't just swimming, they were hunting." Avery examined Quinn's injuries with her medical training. "These scratches are from fingernails," she announced. "Human fingernails, but overgrown and sharp. And look at this." She pointed to marks on Quinn's ankles. "These are bite marks. They tried to drag me into deeper water," Quinn continued, her voice getting stronger as the shock began to wear off. "But when I screamed, they let go and disappeared. I think loud noises hurt their ears." Blake made the decision that probably saved their lives. "We're not staying here another night. We fix that engine, or we build a raft, or we swim to shore if we have to. But we're leaving this place today." Connor worked on the motor with desperate efficiency while the others prepared for evacuation. Sierra had stopped filming entirely, focusing instead on packing only the most essential supplies. Avery treated Quinn's wounds and prepared emergency medical supplies. Blake studied their maps, trying to identify the shortest route back to civilization. But the swimmers had been busy too. When Connor finally got the engine running on fumes and prayer, they discovered that their fuel situation was even worse than they'd realized. Someone had not only contaminated their main tank, but had also punctured their spare fuel containers. "We've got maybe enough gas to run for 30 minutes, Connor reported. "After that, we're dead in the water." Blake studied the lake around them, trying to calculate distances and fuel consumption. "We can't make it back to the launch point, but there's a fishing resort about 15 miles northeast. If we run straight there, no detours, no stopping." "It's our only chance," Sierra agreed. They loaded their most essential gear and prepared to abandon their campsite. As they pushed off from their island, Blake looked back at what had been their perfect wilderness retreat and realized how naive they'd been to think they could drop into this ecosystem without consequences. The lake that had seemed so peaceful just days ago now felt malevolent. Every shadow beneath the surface could be hiding something. Every island they passed could be concealing watchers. They made it about 6 miles before the engine started stuttering. "Fuel lines clogged again," Connor announced, trying to clear the blockage while Blake steered toward the nearest island. But as they limped toward shore, Sierra spotted something that made her grab Blake's arm. "Don't go to that island," she said urgently. "Look at the water around it." Blake followed her gaze and saw what had alarmed her. The water around the small island was full of swimming figures. Dozens of them, moving in coordinated patterns like they were executing some kind of underwater dance. "They're hurting us," Quinn realized, "driving us toward something." Blake changed course, but every direction they turned revealed more swimmers. The lake that had seemed so empty was actually teeming with pale figures moving just beneath the surface. The engine died completely when they were still a mile from the nearest safe shore. "That's it," Connor said. "We're on our own now." Blake grabbed the emergency paddles, but before they could start rowing, the swimmers began to surface around them. Not attacking yet, but definitely surrounding their boat. Up close, the transformation from human to something else was even more apparent. These people, or things that had once been people, showed signs of severe malnutrition, inbreeding, and exposure. But they also showed adaptation. Their hands and feet were larger than normal, with webbed fingers that made them incredibly efficient swimmers. Their eyes were oversized, better suited for seeing underwater. They'd become aquatic predators. "Don't make any sudden movements," Avery whispered. "They're curious about us, but they haven't decided if we're threats or prey." The largest of the swimmers, a gaunt male with scars covering most of his pale torso, approached their boat cautiously. When he spoke, his voice was a harsh rasp that barely resembled human speech. "You leave. Now." Blake found his voice. "We're trying to leave. Our engine is broken." The swimmer tilted his head, processing this information. "You break rules. Come to our water." "We didn't know," Sierra said softly. "We didn't know this was your territory." The swimmer's expression changed, showing what might have been amusement. "All water. Our territory. You. Food now." That's when the coordinated attack began. The swimmers struck simultaneously from multiple directions, their plan clearly rehearsed from previous encounters with stranded boaters. Some grabbed the sides of the boat, trying to tip it over. Others dove beneath it, apparently attempting to damage the hull. The largest ones tried to pull the occupants directly into the water. Blake fought desperately with a paddle, trying to keep the swimmers away from his friends. Connor used their emergency flare gun, the bright magnesium flare causing the attackers to briefly retreat. Sierra discovered that her camera's flash function was incredibly effective. The bright light seemed to cause the swimmers genuine pain, making them release their holds and dive for deeper water. "The light hurts them," she shouted. "They can't stand bright light." Avery was pulled partially over the side by a swimmer that looked like it might have once been a woman, but Blake managed to grab her arms and pull her back into the boat. Quinn, still traumatized from her earlier encounter, was curled in the bottom of the boat but managed to grab their emergency whistle and blow it continuously. The high-pitched sound had an immediate effect. The swimmers released their holds on the boat and retreated to a safe distance. But they didn't leave entirely. "They're regrouping," Connor observed, reloading the flare gun with their last flare. Blake looked around at his friends, all injured, all terrified, but all still alive, and made the hardest decision of his life. "We abandon the boat," he said. "We swim for shore." "Are you insane?" Sierra asked. "That's their territory." "Staying here is suicide," Blake replied. "In the water, we've got a chance. Here, we're just sitting targets." They quickly tied their most essential gear into waterproof bundles and prepared for what they all knew might be their final swim. Blake had identified a rocky shore about 400 yards away. Not close, but possible if they moved fast and stayed together. "Stay in a tight group," he instructed. "Keep using the camera flash and the whistle. Head for those rocks and don't stop for anything." They slipped into the water together, and immediately Blake realized how much danger they were in. The swimmers were incredibly fast and agile in their element, darting around the group like dolphins playing with prey. But the combination of Sierra's camera flash and Quinn's whistle kept them at a distance. Halfway to shore, Avery started struggling. Her earlier injuries had weakened her more than she'd admitted, and she was having trouble keeping up with the group's pace. Blake made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He stopped swimming forward and instead positioned himself between Avery and the circling swimmers. "Keep going," he shouted to the others. "I'll catch up." But everyone knew he was lying. Connor was the one who refused to leave him. The engineer grabbed one of their emergency chemical light sticks, cracked it to activate the phosphorescent glow, and swam back toward Blake and Avery. "Two-person buddy system," Connor said grimly, "just like they taught us in Boy Scouts." Together, they managed to get Avery to the rocky shore, where Sierra and Quinn were already pulling themselves out of the water. The swimmers followed them right to the water's edge, but seemed reluctant to leave their aquatic environment. They spent the rest of that day and night huddled on the small rocky outcropping, taking turns keeping watch and maintaining a signal fire made from driftwood and their emergency supplies. The swimmers remained visible in the water around them, clearly waiting for an opportunity. It was Quinn who spotted the rescue plane first, a small bush plane that was probably doing a routine patrol flight. Sierra immediately started signaling with her camera's flash, while Blake built up their signal fire as high as possible. The plane circled twice, apparently confirming that they needed help, then waggled its wings and flew off toward what they hoped was the nearest airport or ranger station. 2 hours later, they heard the distinctive sound of a seaplane approaching across the lake. The rescue was efficient and professional. The pilot, a grizzled veteran of wilderness emergencies named Tom, had them in the air and heading towards civilization within 15 minutes of touching down. "You folks are lucky," Tom said as they flew over the endless wilderness below. "That's some of the most remote country in North America. People go missing out there and never get found." Blake looked down at the lake system where they'd spent the most terrifying week of their lives and realized that Tom had no idea how accurate his statement was. The debriefing with local authorities was frustrating. Their descriptions of the swimmers were met with polite skepticism, and their insistence that there were people living wild in the boundary waters was dismissed as hallucinations brought on by stress and exposure. "We see this kind of thing sometimes," the sheriff explained patiently. "Wilderness survival situations can cause all kinds of psychological effects. Your minds created explanations for experiences that were probably much more mundane." They never found any evidence of the feral swimmers, despite an extensive search of the area where Blake's group had been stranded. The camping gear and human remains that Quinn had discovered were gone, as if they'd never existed. The 5 friends dealt with their trauma in different ways. Sierra deleted all of her footage from the trip and never posted on social media again. She eventually became a therapist specializing in trauma recovery, but she never went near large bodies of water. Connor became obsessed with wilderness survival training, learning everything possible about emergency preparedness and self-defense in remote areas. He eventually started a company that provides survival equipment and training for backcountry travelers. Quinn developed severe hydrophobia and required months of therapy before she could even take a shower without panic attacks. She eventually recovered enough to function normally, but she never fully believed they'd escaped the swimmers' territory. Avery surprised everyone by becoming more adventurous after her recovery, not less. She completed medical school and became a wilderness emergency physician, but she always carried more weapons and emergency equipment than seemed reasonable for someone in her profession. Blake never slept well again. Every night, he found himself listening for the sound of water, convinced he could hear the swimmers calling to each other in their alien language. He eventually moved to Arizona, as far from large bodies of water as he could get. But sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Blake would research missing persons reports from the Boundary Waters area. The numbers were higher than most people realized. Experienced outdoorsmen and women who simply vanished without a trace in that vast wilderness. He knew what had happened to them. Deep in the most remote lakes of northern Minnesota, something that had once been human was still hunting, still waiting for the next group of unsuspecting tourists to venture into waters that looked peaceful, but hid predators that evolution and isolation had transformed into something from humanity's worst nightmares. The water was too perfect. That had been their first warning. But by the time they understood what the silence meant, they were already being hunted.